Church. Uplifting, supporting, and loving neighbors that are cherished, not only now, but for eternity. Come on, you can use it. The Welcoming Committee is there every Sunday. See you soon.
From the heart of Central Florida, you're listening to the most electrifying show in media, A Neighbor's Choice. And I'm your host, your neighbor, David Gornosky. So glad to be with you again across FM and AM and podcast video stream, coming to you live worldwide on aneighborschoice.com, our go-to homepage for all of our content. And we're ready to have a great week. We're going to have a lot of stuff going on this week, a lot of interesting conversations, a lot of big news that's going to be made, and it's going to be a lot of fun. That's what you've come to expect. That's what you're always going to get, something different, something fresh, something positive. People can talk a big game about being positive or whatever, but at the end of the day, it's actually about what you stand for. If you stand for politics and that's all you stand for, is that really positive? Perhaps politics is the thing that's driving all of us apart. And if we have an addiction to it, if we idolize it, then we'll find out that it's actually decaying our culture. That politics becomes a false god, it becomes a false idol, and it draws us into endless conflict, endless tribalism. And that's not serving anybody's interest. That's not helping anybody out except for the establishment, the powerful, the people who profit off of the stinky status quo. Talking about stinky status quo, another garbage policy is denying science. Look at this story here in the CDC, their own report. New CDC report says mask mandates lower COVID cases by around 1.5% over a 2-month period. The mask mandates decrease death rates by around 1% over a 1-month period, according to the study. The results are inside the margin for statistical error, which I believe is at 5%. So it's not even meeting the threshold of the margin for statistical error, which means this is a statistically insignificant change that's been observed. Nothing. Mask mandates. They say that they're following science, but in reality, they're denying the science. They're denying science by having mask mandates. That doesn't mean there's no, if you want to use a mask, that's fine. But the idea that mask mandates are backed by science, I just showed you science from the CDC itself, which has a vested interest in pushing such heavy-handed policies. Like all bureaucracies, whenever there's a crisis related to their topic, they always use it as an opportunity to get really entrenched with more power, bigger budgets, bigger overreach. So when you look at this, this shows us that they don't have science. They are denying science. Their policies are actually denying science. Their own science shows that the difference in decreased death rates by around 1% over a 1-month period for mask mandates is below, it's inside the margin for statistical error. So that means it's not even based in, for them to say that this is something that they should push is a denial of science, their own CDC science. Meanwhile, CDC and other people are making, this is what you can do. Now, if you get vaccinated, if you get 2 doses, now you can hang out with your family members. Did you know that? Only you can hang out with other people who've been vaccinated. See, they're already trying to create a 2-tier society. Those who passively submit to whatever Big Pharma tells them to do. It doesn't matter whether you're pro-vax or anti-vax. That's not the question here. The question is, are you stupidly just going to do exactly what your state tells you to do when there's no legal skin in the game for the manufacturers? There's not even approved by the FDA, their stuff. They don't know what the long-term effects of doing this type of mRNA vaccine will do, something that's akin to sticking a USB drive into your body for your life, and you're not supposed to, I want to wait on that. You're not allowed to even ask that. And they're already trying to push you to have a two-tier society in which those who get vaccinated, now your state is telling you you can go hang out with other people who get vaccinated. Did you know that? And now you don't have to quarantine if you go anywhere. You can just have a great time. See how they're trying to create a two-tier society? But of course, they're upset because the media, the state media, is saying, we don't know what to do because a lot of African Americans don't want to take this vaccine. And so they don't know what to do. They're trying to double up their efforts on targeting the African American community, which I think is very arrogant, to take people's tax dollars and try to double down on trying to convince people who have their own autonomy. They have their own dignity. They are human sovereign adults. They have a right to do what they want, and not to have their own money used to try to double down on forcing them to do something that they have a desire not to do. It's not scientific. And they're trying to create a two-tier society. What's that going to do? That's going to entrench racial disparities, isn't it? A two-tier society, and they're saying we're concerned African Americans are not taking this vaccine like we wanted to at the rates that we wanted them to do. And then they also want to create this society where people can't perhaps go into watch a game or go to the pub or whatever without having proof of vaccine, which means they're going to be denying people of color access to the same facilities as other people get to have, because they want to have their human autonomy just like anybody else. These people's stupid bigotry and their worship of the state just puts them into a pretzel, doesn't it? On the one hand, they want to act, this Biden administration and all the permanent bureaucracies, that they are the vanguard of social and racial justice and equity. And they want to make the fact that African Americans are rightfully suspect of government trying to tell them what they're supposed to put in their body. But they try to turn it into, well, that's a problem you have with your neighbor. There's racial problems there. We're going to have to double down on funding for, people like Biden and Kamala Harris to try to do racial harmony programs or something like that. Social justice critical theory is what it's all about. That's what they want to push. But they don't know what to do, because how can you fit this narrative into the way they want to present themselves, that they are the arbiters of equity, but yet they want to force people to do stuff that they don't want to do. And then they're going to create a two-tier society that will end up creating disparities to access to facilities and public events, and that will fall disproportionately on people of color. They don't know what to do with themselves. You see, how does one pretend to be social justice hypocrites, self-righteous people like the state, but at the same time do the bidding of Big Pharma when they tell you what to do? See, that the government doesn't know what to do there. Their brand is that they're socially just, but yet Big Pharma says, no, we hired you to do something for us. You're supposed to do our drugs and push them into everybody in the population. You know the drill, state. What do you think we pay you for? So they don't know what to do. It doesn't fit their brand, does it? Doesn't fit their brand. It's a conundrum for nanny state folks. You got one special interest telling them, you need to do your job. We stack the FDA, we stack the Congress, we stack the bureaucratic revolving door relationship with people that work for these giant pharmaceutical companies going in and out of the regulatory agencies. And you're supposed to do a job for us, which is to represent our interests. That's what they tell the state. And the state says, okay. But then that runs afoul of the state's other narrative, which is that they are the salvation of racial injustice. When in reality, they are the ones who have stoked and have predated on people of color. That's what Joe Biden did his entire career. He made a name for trying to disparage persons of color. and disparage people who couldn't fight back because they didn't have the media apparatus behind them that he did. That's what he made his career off of, locking people up, nonviolent, victimless choices. But the media, again, they don't know what to do because he's a useful, reliable puppet for the giant corporations that the media wants to have, wants to see successful through state policy, government policy. But at the same time, he's just a dubious, lousy brand to put at the top of their, White House position. Again, it's a conundrum. What do you do when you're in such a difficult spot? When you're out of ideas, you're out of fresh ideas, you're out of fresh voices, you're out of fresh, vitality. You're still stuck on tyranny. And the world is a little bit more complex than it was back in the 20th century when top-down tyrannical models were a little bit more easier to apply in mass. We'll take a break and return in just a moment. And later on in the program, we're going to hear from State Representative Anthony Sabatini, who made a big announcement. We're going to have it on the air in just a moment. Stay with us. David Gronowski here.
David Gronowski here. Let me tell you about a man named Gabriel. Every day, Gabriel puts on his boots and drives across America to make sure our store shelves stay stocked with the food people count on. See, Gabriel served our country overseas. He knows that America stands for freedom, quality, and caring for others the way we would like to be treated. That's why when Gabriel saw food shelves getting low during the pandemic, he hit the road as a driver with Oakley Transport. In the land of the free, where no one should go hungry, we need heroes like Gabriel to help keep America fed. CDLA driving professionals, join Oakley Transport today. Keep America fed. Visit oakleytransport.com or call them today at 1-877-8-TANKER. That's 1-877-8-TANKER. Are you ready to transform your career? Jess Smith was too. She was stuck in a job that was controlling her life, consuming her free time, and offering little opportunity for growing her pay. Then she found FinTech Mortgage Association, and she never looked back. FinTech Mortgage Association makes home lending simple, and they take care of home buyers like family. Using technology to make everyone's life easier, FinTech Mortgage Association equips each of their loan solutions architects with the tools they need to build a career with a schedule they control, a product they can take pride in, and an earning potential that is life-changing. Unleash your true potential. Join FinTech Mortgage Association. Visit finmay.com. That's FINMAE.com. You're in charge now. NMLS ID 1492187. Equal housing lender.
A lawsuit is not something that anyone looks forward to. It's a stressful process. There are attorneys in Tampa Bay that keep clients well informed, creating less stress. That law firm is Catania. Personal injury law is defended with full disclosure. There is no guessing game. If it's an auto accident, medical malpractice, nursing home negligence, unsafe working conditions, or motorcycle accidents, the law firm of Catania will handle the process worry-free from start to finish. Many victims don't realize they have a claim for the loss until they talk to Catania. They only represent private individuals and treat every case as if it's going to trial. Putting families first is more than just a slogan. It's their way of practicing law. It's a commitment to you. Remember, they don't get paid if you don't get paid. So go to Catania.com. Over 28 years in practice. Catania, personal injury, auto, and motorcycle accident attorneys. Catania, putting families first.
Office Tampa. Not attorney spokeswoman.
Neighbor's Choice returns. David Gronowski here, your host. You can email me hello@aneighborschoice.com if you have a comment, or drop us a comment on our YouTube stream. Just search for David Gronowski there and you should be able to find it. Sometimes it's a little hard to find our videos with YouTube's algorithms, I guess. But we persist nonetheless, because we're going to be here beyond what YouTube can imagine. YouTube thinks that they have a monopoly on video content, but they don't. They're just a flash in the pan for the grand scheme of things. And we're going to be fighting for the truth, speaking for the truth in all aspects of our lives. We're not going to just stay stuck on, left versus right. That's a very limited thing. But let me show you an example of the insanity of the culture that is addicted to politics, the culture that is addicted to words over actual violence as a concern. You see, Matt Taibbi is a journalist. He's a person of the left, but he knows how to actually speak the truth still. You see, he's not totally consumed. Now, I think he's from Rolling Stone. I don't know if he's still with them. I think he may be, but he put out a comment on social media saying, the ultimate example of woke washing. A man who oversaw torture, surveillance, and drone assassination programs says what embarrasses him is this. And it's a quote from former CIA Director John Brennan, who says, "I'm increasingly embarrassed to be a white male these days," which prompts MSNBC's Nicole Wallace to laugh. So, this is what, he calls it woke washing, and he's a person of the left. So, you have a perspective that I think transcends partisan lines and ideology, because people are tired of this stuff. Here you have a guy who spent his career, as Matt Taibbi said, overseeing torture, overseeing illegal surveillance, overseeing drone assassination of Anwar al-Awlaki's 16-year-old American son and his friends over a campfire. John Brennan. But what he's embarrassed about is that he's a white male these days. You see how everything is about symbol over reality? The left has lost its utter mind here. They used to be like Matt Taibbi, where they were actually concerned with things like that. Was what they were concerned with. Matt Taibbi was representative of where the left talked in a mainstream way in the era of Bush. They would speak out on MSNBC and other places about the dangers of illegal surveillance, the dangers of torture, the dangers of drone assassination programs, the dangers of regime change against countries that should not really pose a direct threat to our safety. But now what they talk about is they bring these guys who did the torture, the surveillance, the droning of kids, and they come on and they preen about how they're embarrassed. They're not embarrassed of waterboarding people who weren't even, responsible for the crimes that they were accused of. John Brennan is not embarrassed about surveillance, which is strictly prohibited by the Fourth Amendment. He's not embarrassed about drone assassination, which goes against how Congress shall declare war. Only Congress shall declare war. And the idea of killing American citizens, even if they're overseas, it doesn't make them, totally. And I have a problem with drone striking any citizen. But the point is, even on the low bar threshold of just looking at it constitutionally here, besides just morality, he fails that too. And yet, MSNBC, they want to have him on as a hero because he will self-flagellate about how he's a white male. And he's a little bit embarrassed about being a white male. Not about torturer. He's not embarrassed to be a torturer. He's not embarrassed to be someone who advocates regime change in Syria, which has cost so many innocent people's lives. He's not embarrassed for advocating the funding of Al-Qaeda in Syria and the rise of ISIS. He's not embarrassed for participating in regime change chaos against Libya. It's stoking insurrection, which has led to the destruction of liberties and destruction of women all over the globe. He's not embarrassed of any of that. He's just going to give you a token little thing, a little bumper sticker McWokeism. Say, I'm embarrassed, I'm a white male. That's all we care about, that you just say that your skin color and your gender, that's your problem, not your moral record of violence. See, he doesn't want to talk about his action. They don't want to talk about the reality of what he's actually done, they want to shift the focus onto, well, your gender and your race is the problem, not your actual record of violence, you see. Why? Because they ultimately don't have a moral foundation at this point. Their moral foundation is power is the ultimate good. Might makes right. And so they have found a useful narrative right now to divide people, to divide the powerless, to fight each other over who's the most victimized race, who's the most victimized gender, who's the most victimized here, there, everywhere. And they can get everybody like us in the real world, in the neighborhoods of America, to fight over who's the most victimized by their policy. Meanwhile, they want to normalize the torturers, the illegal surveillance folks, the drone assassins. You see how they twist morality, but they throw you a distraction, something that's easy. If you're amoral and you have no moral compass, and you know that people are really, it's trendy to say, oh yeah, there's a problem with white males, but there's not a problem with drone striking, surveillance, regime change, chaos, any of that stuff. We reserve the right to do that whenever we need, but we're going to do a token self-flagellation about skin. Well, that's easy. The state will do that kind of stuff all day long because that doesn't require them to lose a drop of their power, a drop of their money, a drop of their control, a drop of their Machiavellian narcissistic delusions. That's easy. That's why I call this religion McWoke. It's McWokeism because it's as real and as authentic as the latest thing at McDonald's. It's McWoke. It is a mass-manufactured, mass-produced, artificial, seasoned, dubious goop of a religion. McWoke. And people like John Brennan love this kind of stuff because it gives power to the powerful. It entrenches their power. It allows them to act like, oh, look, I'm having a reckoning. I'm dealing with I'm a male. Oh, okay, yeah, but you're still calling for regime change? Yes. Still calling for scoundrel insurrection with the Russiagate stuff? Yes. Still creating bloody coups that hurt and displace millions of people all over the globe? Yes. Nothing's changed. It's the same evil wickedness that they've been engaged in on both sides of the aisle, but they get you to say, oh, look, it looks like there's a reckoning because he's saying he's concerned about how he's a white male. Oh, wow. This is only something that low information people would be duped by. Only low information people would buy this stuff. Like, I guess, the target audience for MSNBC at this point. MSNBC used to have people who would actually talk about the Fourth Amendment, and they would talk about declaration of war. Congress shall declare war. Article 1, Section 8. Only Congress has the power to declare war. And if there's not a state actor, then Congress has the right to issue a letter of marque and reprisal, which is what you would do to take out a non-state entity that is posing an imminent direct threat against the American people. But John Brennan doesn't care about that stuff. He cares about doing the McWoke stuff because McWoke stuff entrenches the powerful, it enriches the corporatists who exploit our labor, and it distracts people who feel like there's a lot of things wrong, but they don't exactly know where to look and where to figure out where it's coming from. So that's the deal with this stuff. So we need change. We need to talk about it directly. We need to talk about it honestly. When we return, we'll have State Representative Anthony Sabatini, who'll be joining us for his big announcement that he's making today. Back in just a moment.
Politics these days are just that, politics. Pathetic discussions about things that don't matter. While the pandemic, crime, and economic disparity march on. That's why you need a balanced approach to news, business, and entertainment in the state of Florida. That publication is newstalkflorida.com. Whether it's the White House, the courthouse, or your neighbor's house, News Talk Florida has the sources, articles, video, and audio that will be a must daily check-in from your laptop or mobile device. Take a look at newstalkflorida.com. Today's news and entertainment with a Florida slant.
In Minneapolis, the trial of former police officer Derek Chauvin has recessed for the day. He's charged in the death of George Floyd. Jury selection on hold while an appeals court decides whether third-degree murder charges will be reinstated. Jackson, Mississippi's water system could see a full recovery from the winter storm damage by the end of the week. That from Public Works Director Charles Williams today.
This brought to light a lot of issues that have been plaguing the city for some time. And in order for us to fully address it, that's why we've been asking for funding.
After passing the Senate, the president's $1.9 trillion coronavirus stimulus bill now expected to be kicked back to the House tomorrow. The House Speaker predicting it's on track for the president to sign it this week. New York Attorney General Letitia James today announcing the appointment of two attorneys, one formerly from the U.S. Southern District, the other specializing in civil rights, to investigate allegations of sexual harassment levied at Governor Andrew Cuomo. Dave Packer, ABC News.
Neighbor's Choice returns. I'm your host, David Gronowski. So glad to be with you. And we're joined now by a frequent guest of the program, someone who is a real champion for liberty across Florida, especially in this time of the pandemic. And people trying to erode basic foundational rights that we have in this country. We have with us State Representative Anthony Sabatini. How you doing?
Never been better, David. Thanks for having me on, brother. God bless America.
Yeah, and you're charged up, and I understand it's a lot of wind out there today, which means there's time for change, huh? So it's the winds of change are howling, right?
Hopefully for the better. It's time to get rid of the rhino neocon establishment in our party and blow the winds in a different direction.
So I want to get right to it at the beginning. So tell us your announcement that you've made today.
Well, I'm happy to announce to your listeners that today I filed to run for the United States Congress.
That's fantastic. I'm excited to hear that because we need folks like you, Anthony, in the U.S. Congress, because a lot of folks up there, they don't seem to really care about the Constitution. But I've seen what you do with the rights of Floridians here. You went to bat for folks. I remember that gentleman over in St. Pete that you provided pro bono legal work for because he was arrested for trying to do business during the pandemic. But to take that kind of mindset to Congress, that would be a unique thing.
Absolutely. The enemies of our Constitution are bipartisan. We have the sellout, shill, corporate, neocon, Republican establishment run by people like Liz Cheney and Mitch McConnell, who should be in jail, who are trying to just do everything they can to destroy liberty in this country because it's something very easily expendable, partnered up with the radical left who legitimately want us to be a communist country where the government can control everything you think, do, are, and wear. And that's what we're up against. And so I'm fighting to renew the Republican Party, to bring a new birth of freedom into our party, end the endless wars, restore liberty, cut taxes, and have more respect for the traditional beliefs that our founding fathers believe in.
Well, I want to ask you about that. Why is it, the MSNBC and CNN and all the corporate media outlets, they love promoting people like Liz Cheney, but they also say that these media outlets say that they're for social justice, that they're for the concern of the misfit, the outsider, the downtrodden, the oppressed. And I can't think of anything more oppressive than Liz Cheney's desire to have endless wars. It's oppressive for folks in countries that don't want to be occupied endlessly, and it's oppressive for soldiers who are used for reasons which are not really lawful.
Exactly. Well, it's about appeasing the corrupt defense establishment, which bankrolls a lot of the campaigns of these career politicians, including D.C. Beltway lifetime insiders. Although Liz Cheney's only been in office 5 years, she's been a swamp creature for about 20 or 30, depending how you look at it. And so that's what it's really about. It's pay for play, it's about money, and it's about being able to grift off the working people of this country. And that's why we're so involved in so many boondoggles around the world.
Yeah, that's the case. It's one of those things that I don't think our folks who do believe in ending the endless wars have talked more about. Is if you guys care for minority communities, you got to care for people of color around the world too, who get the bombs and the drone strikes and the occupation.
That's exactly right. So whether it's foreign policy or domestic policy, we have to put Americans first, and that usually means doing pretty much the opposite of what a lot of our Bush-era Republicans have been doing for a very long time.
Right. So what are some of your priorities on the domestic front if you make it to the U.S. Congress?
The biggest thing we need to do is deinstitutionalize the radical left. Our number one priority should be doing things like shutting down the Department of Education, draining the swamp through cutting agency funding and lowering taxes. You have to starve the beast. The seeds of the destruction of our country, the slow roll towards the destruction of our country, starts within the leftist institutions that are already in play, both the media, these sorts of things. I want to defund NPR, shut down the radical universities, which host a lot of the hostile views that destroy our country, and then fix our trade deals to make sure that working people are doing, are being benefited in illegal immigration stops, which would benefit our working people too. That would have the most direct and long-standing, large impact, positive impact upon people of Central Florida, the district I will represent.
Right. And of course, we're broadcasting coast to coast in Florida around different counties and different regions of this area. But a lot of folks who listen to the program are in college or have a child in college. What's your plan for dealing with the problem with college education? Should we allow people to discharge their student loan debt in bankruptcy, for example? Is that something you'd look at?
No, absolutely not. The focus needs to be, first, to shut down the Department of Education. Number two, the focus needs to be on relevant degrees and degrees which allow a person to be a small business owner, a proprietor of their own business very quickly out of college or learn a skilled trade. We have to shut down any indirect support we have for the insane sort of silly, liberal, weird, pseudoscientific majors that we're subsidizing right now. That's one of the big things we could be doing.
Right. Yeah, we're in a time where it feels like almost like a cultural revolution where every day they keep normalizing the censorship of things as innocuous as Dr. Seuss. You think this ultimately starts in universities, right?
Yes, the cancel culture stems from so-called learned institutions, learned, woke ways of looking at the world, the media and the higher universities, the biggest enemies of the American spirit. Right. And so deinstitutionalizing them at the state and federal level has to be, is really the only way we can deal with saving the country. Trump started to get at this when he issued the executive order to stop the race-based and radical identitarian identity politics training for anybody who was contracting with the federal government. We need to expand this to make it even more difficult for anybody. Identity politics is racist and un-American and has no place in our society.
Right. I'm looking at a comment that I touched on it earlier, but former CIA Director John Brennan says, "I'm increasingly embarrassed to be a white male these days." He said that on MSNBC, and I thought, Matt Taibbi said, this is a man who oversaw torture, surveillance, and drone assassination programs, but this is what he's atoning for. Isn't that amazing where we've lost our mind here?
Absolutely. That's exactly right. That's a great assessment.
Yeah. Well, hey, I know you're busy. This is a big day that you're announcing, but what would be something that, you learned in the state legislature of Florida that you're going to be bringing to the halls of U.S. Congress if elected?
Well, I'm mostly known in the state legislature for being the loudest, strongest anti-lockdown advocate. I was the first and loudest and most effective person to fight against lockdowns, curfews, face mask mandates, and anything having to do with restricting liberties in the name of safety, which does neither. Just like Benjamin Franklin said, those who want to submit their safety to earn or their freedom in order to gain some safety, temporary safety, will end up with neither. And that's what I'm most known for in the state legislature. I've also filed legislation, and I've had 5 bills signed by the governor. The one that I'm most proud of is a bill that makes it the government has to pay for your attorney's fees when they violate your rights. That's probably my biggest thing. And then the Donald Trump highway, of course.
Yeah. Well, Well, that's very good. So when you get to that level, if you're able to be elected in this race, is there a place for Congress to step in with big tech, do you think, in your perspective?
Absolutely. And you brought up another one of the bills I'm most proud to file, a bill that would make it a new cause of action, a new type of lawsuit in which you could sue a social media company in the state of Florida if they ban or censor you based on your political or religious viewpoint, which, as we know, is what happens to millions of people on a daily basis in this country. So I would be filing similar legislation at the federal level, focusing on reforming Section 230 to not allow these giant so-called town squares to punish working Americans because they don't believe that their political views are the same enlightened type that the West Coast liberals have.
Wow. So what can we expect in this race? What's going to be the biggest narrative in this race as we watch this thing unfold here between you and who you're going to be facing?
I think you're going to see the Republican Beltway establishment drop out at least minimum $1 million, maybe $2 million in order to try to take me out. And I know that's going to happen. It's pretty much already happening. I dropped my ad today, and I featured a sinister depiction of America's biggest villain, which is Liz Cheney, who's a warmonger and mentally unstable. And I think that they're going to really target me in this race, and that's completely fine.
Right. So how do you plan to fight back if you're going to have the Republican Party establishment coming after you? What's your plan?
Well, we're doing a lot of small dollar donations. We're already at 150,000 in pledges and commits. We're looking at $250,000 rather quickly, and we'll be at $1 million hopefully by next spring. So I think we're going to have the money and the resources to compete. But more importantly, our message is something that sells well and is popular with the American working people themselves. The America First populist pro-liberty agenda that most Americans agree with. So the Beltway just doesn't know how to compete with the Trump message, and that's why they're so infuriated, and that's why they've worked so hard to try to take him down. So I think we're going to win this. It's going to be a battle, but we'll see what happens. We'll see what happens along the way.
And for Florida listeners, what counties does your congressional district that you're running for cover for folks who are local?
Well, I'll be running for the congressional district that's being rewritten this fall. All of the districts are being rewritten in December of this year, but it will likely include the same Western Central Florida counties that I live in and represent now, which is mostly Lake County, but will also include places like Sumter County, Citrus, Hernando, parts of Orange, maybe even Polk or Osceola.
What would you say finally as we leave here? What would you say to folks who are saying, you know what, I feel like the fight for liberty, America's toast, we've lost. The left and the neocons, they're running the show. They're cracking down. There's not much we can do but just hide. What would you say to people who have that mentality? Because you do see that around,
Oh, well, I would just tell these people to consider looking at things a little bit differently. I mean, this country, a lot of people are very pessimistic right now. I'm an optimist. I'm a sunny Floridian optimist. I think our country's on the upswing. We just have to take our party back, and then we'll take the country back. And the message that Donald Trump has instituted, in the minds of tens of millions of Americans is taking root, and it's a gathering force right now.
Well, very good. It's always great having you on the program, and best of luck in your race. We will look forward with interest to see how it plays out.
Thanks, David. Talk to you soon. Take care.
Very good. That's State Representative Anthony Sabatini. He's announced his race for U.S. Congress. It'll be interesting to see how that plays out. This is a time where you need to have a shakeup in the Republican Party. There's an attempt to try to act as if the Republican base and their voting for Trump to end the endless wars was just an anomaly, and they could just go back to the standard Mitch McConnell, Paul Ryan, the same old Liz Cheney, war after war, managed crooked trade deals, all this kind of old school establishment neocon policy that really is very popular with a lot of Republican donors, but it's not at all popular with the Republican voting base and folks who are independent, who are essential for winning these general elections, especially in states like purple states like Florida. So it'll be interesting to see how this plays out. It seems to be a David versus Goliath fight if the Republican establishment comes out en masse to try to protect their establishment perspective here in this district. But, who knows who could get involved to tip the scales in the favor of a liberty advocate like Anthony Sabatini. So this will be one to watch. We will watch it and cover it on this show, as well as the other similar stories that will continue to define the future of conservatism in the future. So we'll stay tuned and just be back in just a moment. We'll take a quick break. Email me hello@aneighborschoice.com. That's hello@aneighborschoice.com, or drop us a comment on YouTube. Back in a moment.
Hello, this is David Gronowski with A Neighbor's Choice. I've got a mission for you. I'm a big believer in eating family farm-raised, high-quality grass-fed beef. That's why I'm a frequent customer of White Oak Pasture, a sixth-generation beautiful farm in southwest Georgia. Support sustainable, delicious meat of the highest quality. Ask for White Oak Pasture's beef at your local grocery here in Florida, or go to whiteoakpastures.com, and first-time customers get 20% off on purchases with our exclusive coupon code NEIGHBOR. Who is your neighbor? Dave and Wally are team drivers for Oakley Transport. One day, they came across a very serious accident on the highway. Some might pass on by, but Dave and Wally saw there was no time to waste. They jumped into action and saved 2 people's lives with moments to spare. That's the kind of courageous love we need more of today. It reflects the respected culture Oakley Transport develops with their driving professionals. CDLA licensed drivers. Join Oakley Transport today for a rewarding career. Visit oakleytransport.com. That's oakleytransport.com. Are you ready to transform your career? Jess Smith was too. She was stuck on a job that was controlling her life, consuming her free time, and offering little opportunity for growing her pay. Then she found FinTech Mortgage Association, and she never looked back. FinTech Mortgage Association makes home lending simple, and they take care of home buyers like family. Using technology to make everyone's life easier, FinTech Mortgage Association equips each of their loan solutions architects with the tools they need to build a career with a schedule they control, a product they can take pride in, and an earning potential that is life-changing. Unleash your true potential. Join FinTech Mortgage Association. Visit finmay.com. That's FINMAE.com. You're in charge now. NMLS ID 1492187. Equal housing lender.
It's time for our cancel update. Who has been canceled this week? Well, apparently the newest person to get the witch hunt mob after them is Pepe Le Pew. TMZ has a story. New York Times op-ed writer claims skunk perpetuated rape culture. So after Dr. Seuss has been muzzled, the Looney Tunes character Pepe Le Pew fell into the crosshairs of New York Times columnist Charles M. Blow, who wrote an op-ed titled 6 Seuss Books Bore a Bias, where he argued racism is deeply embedded into American culture and fed to kids at a young age. But that's what he's talking about. Charles, this writer is talking about how this Pepe Le Pew is an attack against everything. He says, this helped teach boys that no didn't really mean no, that it was a part of the game, the starting line of a power struggle. It taught overcoming a woman's strenuous, even physical objections was normal, adorable, funny. They didn't even give the woman the ability to speak. So this is what you do when you're a New York Times McWoke writer. You will take on Pepe Le Pew of Looney Tunes, and then you will vote for Joseph Le Biden, who bombs everybody into the hell. This is what you do, you see? You bomb everybody into oblivion. You go vote for those bombers. You vote for those mass cagers like Biden and Kamala Harris, but then you take out a Looney Tunes character. That's the kind of moral courage that it takes to be a New York Times McWoke writer today. You see? You will feel good as you vote for a guy. You want to talk about, overcoming, attacks? You want to talk about the power struggle? You want to talk about what's going on here? How about the millions of people who have been affected by the incarceration that Joe Biden has put on has enacted against nonviolent people? Men, women, children have been torn apart because of Biden's drug war policies. Children have been blown apart by Biden's war policies. They didn't need to be. But if you have courage in today's McWoke culture, you'll be like Charles Blow and you'll take out a Looney Tunes character and then go vote for Biden so that people like Brennan can be back in charge. That's what they have to offer. Andrew Clavin said something. He says, just remember during moral panics, the Salem witch trials, McCarthyism, the current wokeness, the accusers think they're the heroes. Then the panic passes and they're villains forever. That will happen this time too. The only reason that happens, and McCarthyism could be debated because there was some evidence that McCarthy was actually onto something with some of the things he was looking at, as some commenters in my comments pointed out. But, Salem witch trial, current wokeness, these moral panics, the only reason why the accusers get turned into villains is because of Christianity. Christianity is the one that introduced the concern for the victim, the concern for the scapegoat. And the gospel is a story in which there's a witch trial, there's a moral panic, if you will, against Jesus, but the camera of the story is keeping with the person who's being blamed, the one who's being accused. Jesus was accused of being a sorcerer, a insurrectionist. He was considered to be anti-tax rebel, that kind of stuff. But then the camera stays with Jesus, and you realize these guys are in a moral panic. They're the villains here, actually. And that's why that kind of thing happens in today's society. Moral panics happened all the time in the ancient world, but they stayed written by the victors of those ancient world conflicts. To this day, we don't question when it says, like if you read the ancient myth Oedipus Rex, nobody questions the idea that Oedipus was guilty. It just says in the text, Oedipus admits he was guilty of patricide and incest. And that's supposed to be good enough. That's fine. He said he's guilty. That means he's really guilty. And rather than being suspicious of the text and realizing that perhaps it's being written by the victors of history who are, writing the guilt into their target, instead of being accurate about the actual reality of things. So that's what we're having to deal with today. We have to deal with this challenge of narratives between mythic cover-ups for powerful folks and the truth, which cracks the constraints, cracks the foundations of the powerful. Washington Post says in a glorious little sycophantic thing, Biden stimulus showers money on Americans, sharply cutting poverty and defining move of presidency. Does that not sound like that sounds like propaganda? Of course it's propaganda. That's how that's how the media, the Washington Post, describes a stimulus handout. Sounds like state media to me. Sounds like outlets that are not in the best interest of the truth. People who are designed or set up in a way that always push a narrative that favors the elites, the powerful, the tops, the establishment. We have to move beyond that narrow confine. We have to move beyond that nonsense and do something better for our future. We have to have an honest media that tells the truth, that doesn't do blame games every time there's something that's too stressful, that you have to go and Okay, let's find someone to blame and point all the fingers to. Point all the fingers at. Speaking of the latest scapegoat to fall, New York Governor Cuomo, Ken Girardin says, we're 2 accusers away from New York Governor Cuomo letting restaurants reopen at 125% capacity. But that tells you the heart of politics when you hear these little jokes like this. That it's all about the crowd. It's all about being able to massage the crowd passions in front of you so that you can stay ahead of the winds of the crowd. So if the winds blow one way, you try to stay ahead of it. If the winds go another way, you try to get ahead of that curve too. You always try to stay nimble out of the way of the crowd turning on you. But that doesn't serve your interest. That doesn't help you get a job. That doesn't help you with your career. It doesn't help you achieve what you need to achieve for your family. All it does is create misery. All it does is create destruction and entrench the powerful at your expense, exploiting your labor for a predatory statist class that uses the state to enrich itself without having to have competition. That they always promise us, we'll give you regulations to protect you, but those regulations, all they do is protect the foxes that are guarding the hen house of our economy and our freedom of our children. We have a society that's lost hope for a moment, and I think we can get it back. CBSNews.com says experts sound the alarm on declining birth rates among younger generations. It's a crisis, they say. But you don't give people hope. What are they supposed to do? People, give birth when they feel like there's a hope for the future. So that's what we have to deal with. Hope for the future is what we need to cultivate. Because it's not something that's pie in the sky. There's a lot of things to be thankful for. There's a lot of things to be hopeful for. But it feels hard in the moment. I understand that. When I deal with these tough issues, it can seem like, man, are you getting negative? I thought you're Mr. Positive. But you have to deal with it, right? You have to be honest about these things. You can't just, stick your head in the sand and pretend like, everything's roses. No, this is a tough fight. People are losing their minds en masse. Families are falling apart en masse. Debt is accumulating en masse. Bad ideas are winning in the mainstream media en masse. It's a tough fight up ahead. But our job is not to win the masses. Our job is to fight for the truth and allow a tireless minority of folks to rise up, defend their families, protect their homes, protect their liberties, and to defend them all the way, all across the board. We should be in the fight for the human person. Personhood is what it's all about. Personhood is what makes a country great. When you respect the human person, the smallest minority in the world is the human individual. And if we don't make space to protect the human individual, we'll have no society at all. That means we have to make space for the misfit. We have to make space for the contrarian. We have to make space for the Nikola Tesla, the strange people among us. We have to give space to them. But that doesn't mean that we turn to collectivism, that we turn to tribalism, and that we start trying to vie for power over whose identity is the most victimized. That is not the way to personhood. Personhood is about dignity. It's about being proactive. It's about being responsible for your life. And it's about loving your neighbor as yourself. That's the moral virtue component that makes things go from just another individual to a person with purpose and dignity and a forward-thinking mind. I'm David Gornowski. Up next, we'll hear from Fox News host Steve Hilton for his groundbreaking research on Dr. Fauci and the origins of coronavirus. Back in just a moment. But for now, Godspeed.
Your home for news, talk, and information. 1040 WHBO Pinellas Park. Tampa Bay's all new News Talk 1040.
It's the only way I get news.
From ABC News, I'm Dave Packer. At the White House, President Biden on this International Women's Day announcing 2 female generals nominated for appointment to positions as 4-star combatant commander.
When confirmed, they will become the second and third women in the history of the United States Armed Forces to lead combatant commands.
And the president paying tribute to women throughout American history. Court has wrapped up for the day in Minneapolis, where the trial of former police officer Derek Chauvin got underway after a slow start. ABC's Mark Remillard is there.
Attorneys for the prosecution and defense were not able to seat any jurors after the defense announced it was seeking an appeal related to a possible new charge against Chauvin. That paused jury selection proceedings, but the defense and prosecution were able to reduce the potential pool of jurors ever so slightly.
Juror number 11 for cause. 12.
Defense attorney Eric Nelson read off a list of jurors that he says both the defense and prosecution agreed to strike ahead of the start of jury selection, which is now expected to begin Tuesday morning. Mark Remillard, ABC News, Minneapolis.
If you've already gotten one of the COVID-19 vaccines, the CDC says they've eased restriction recommendations for you.
The CDC recommending that fully vaccinated grandparents can now safely see their families and see others who've received the shot without a mask or distance. And
fully vaccinated people do not need quarantine or get tested following a known exposure to someone with COVID-19 as long as they are asymptomatic.
CDC Director Dr. Rochelle Walensky saying everyone else should continue with the same mask and distance guidance. Andy Field, ABC News, Washington.
New York Attorney General Letitia James today announcing the appointment of two attorneys, one formerly a former acting attorney for the U.S. Southern District of New York, the other specializing in civil rights, to investigate allegations of sexual harassment leveled at Governor Andrew Cuomo. You're listening to ABC News.
Do you check your Google search results regularly? You should. People often get their first impression of you or your business online. Negative comments on the internet can impact your life and your livelihood. Take control of your online reputation. Get your free reputation report card at reputationdefender.com. It may reveal negative posts from an ex-employee, upset patient or client, news article, legal issue, or even exposed personal information right there in your Google search results. Uncover what's lurking on the internet about you with reputationdefender.com's patented scan and get your free reputation report card. Or for immediate assistance with your reputation, call 800-401-6681. Our cutting-edge technology helps make your Google search results look their best. Call 800-401-6681. That's 800-401-6681. 800-401-6681. Or take the free scan at reputationdefender.com.
Students at the University of Colorado Boulder say the large crowds battling police over the weekend were expressing frustration over COVID restrictions.
It was Saturday night when the parties just off campus at the University of Colorado turned into what police are calling a riot. Tear gas was used to disperse about 800 people. A car was tipped over. Windows were broken. Now students are saying it was in response to COVID rules that have hampered their ability to party and have freedoms.
This is a culmination, kindred spirits that have come together to put on something beautiful, a rebellion.
Police and the university say they will take action against those identified. Alex Stone, ABC News.
Mackenzie Scott, the ex-wife of Amazon founder and CEO Jeff Bezos, has tied the knot. She married high school science teacher Jan Jewett in Seattle. The couple plans to give away billions to charity. ABC's Rebecca Jarvis.
In 2019, after 25 years, Scott and Bezos went through a high-profile divorce, leaving her as one of the world's richest women. Forbes now estimating that Scott's net worth is currently $53 billion.
Scott has already donated $6 billion to food banks and organizations that help people in marginalized communities. Pope Francis back at the Vatican following his trip to Iraq, where he called for unity and peace in the country. It was the first ever trip by a pope to Iraq. This is ABC News.
Hello, Pat Boone here. You know, for years I've been warning Americans about the secret war on cash by big government, targeting your money and your privacy. The folks at Swiss America have detailed all the dirty little government secrets in their free report, The Secret War on Cash, and it's available now by calling 800-289-2646. 800-289-2646 or 800-289-2646.
Dave Packer, ABC News.
Hello, this is David Kronosky with A Neighbor's Choice. I've got a mission for you. I'm a big believer in eating family farm-raised, high-quality grass-fed beef. That's why I'm a frequent customer of White Oak Pasture, a 6th-generation beautiful farm in southwest Georgia. Support sustainable, delicious meat of the highest quality. Ask for White Oak Pasture's beef at your local grocery here in Florida, or go to whiteoakpastures.com, and first-time customers get 20% off on purchases with our exclusive coupon code NEIGHBOR.
From the heart of Central Florida, you're listening to the most electrifying show in media, A Neighbor's Choice. And I'm your host, your neighbor, David Gronowski. So glad to be back with you all for our second hour of today's live broadcast, coming to you worldwide. So happy to see our audience growing in places like the continent of Africa, like Southeast Asia. We got folks in Finland and Sweden reaching out. Wonderful. And it's always great to have folks from all over the world, including our great United States of America, who are challenging toxic groupthink. They don't want to be stuck on groupthink that gets us bogged down into politics and tribalism. They want to free their minds and speak courageously. That's what's in short supply today, is courage. And that's why I'm excited to have my guest on, who's a real treat to have him on, someone who has been doing a story, an investigation that I think is a huge story and huge implications if it can be proven to be correct, the premise of what's being unfolded here in the research. And that is our guest. He is the host of the Next Revolution on Fox News, Steve Hilton. How you doing, Steve?
I'm doing great. It's wonderful to be with you. Thank you.
Yeah, and it's great to have you on the program because you've been doing a story now on the origins, researching how the COVID-19 virus came about. And it's something that, my goodness, that's a hot topic. And you picked about the most sensitive topic you could do, but it's an important one. And that's why you have to have courage if you want to do journalism, right?
Well, that's exactly right. And, it's so important because we all know what a terrible toll the pandemic and the virus has taken around the world, not just the virus itself, but in many people's view, the response to the virus, the lockdowns. And of course, I'm speaking to you from California, and of course, we're all very jealous of what's going on in Florida, where you've had a much different response, which has produced a much better outcome for people. But regardless of where you live, you can all agree, everyone can agree, that we don't want to see anything like this happen again. And so it's really important to understand how it happened this time. And that's what we've been looking into.
Right. And it's something that, of course, all the fact checkers came out and said, no, nothing to see here. This is totally bogus. I'm looking at a story on PolitiFact, I guess, that was responding to your story, maybe. It said, no, Dr. Anthony Fauci did not fund research tied to the COVID-19 creation, in scare quotes. But that's not exactly what you're saying. You've been laying out a lot of facts, and I want to just let you have the floor in this hour to just kind of lay the facts as your team has been finding them. So, obviously we can regurgitate what the fact checkers say, but I don't think that they're being very honest in the way they go about fact checking.
Well, I appreciate that. And I think it's really important to take it slowly, step by step, and make the argument in a reasonable way. And there's a lot of detail there, but, it's a complicated story. So if you don't mind, I'll just sort of start laying out some of the steps. And please just jump in at any point to clarify, and then we can talk about the way that we've seen the reaction unfold. But I think one simple way of thinking about it is there are two big parts to the story. Part one is the question about whether or not the virus, the pandemic virus, SARS-CoV-2, as it's known scientifically, whether that virus actually occurred in nature and spread to humans and then infected the population starting in Wuhan, or whether in fact it was leaked. It leaked from a lab in Wuhan, and that theory that it actually leaked from a lab in Wuhan, not deliberately, because someone put it out there as a bioweapon or something like that, but simply an accident. that theory, when it was first proposed last year, was widely dismissed as a conspiracy theory. But what you're seeing since we really started laying out the evidence for this, going back a few weeks now, is more and more mainstream organizations coming in behind it, where you've seen, for example, the Wall Street Journal editorial board concluding that this is a very likely and plausible origin source of the virus that we need to look into. Even the Washington Post, in a very comprehensive editorial explaining the reasons why you might think that the lab leak hypothesis, as it's been known, is plausible and needs to be investigated. And then I think the third piece of this element of the story I think is really interesting is what happened just a few weeks ago with the WHO investigation. So the investigation, which we and others have been criticizing for a long time now, as others have reported, it's basically a whitewash. It's not a serious investigation at all. And the Chinese authorities have not cooperated. They've been covering up and refusing to engage with the investigation. The investigation itself has been set up in a way that doesn't inspire any confidence. You've got people on there who've got huge conflicts of interest. We can get into that in a moment. But remember what happened a few weeks ago. They went to, finally, about a year after the pandemic broke out, the WHO investigative team finally went to China. And they spent 4 weeks there roughly. And the first 2 weeks were entirely in quarantine. They didn't go anywhere. Then they made one visit to the Wuhan lab. They asked a few questions. They left, and then they published an interim report a few days later, which basically ruled out the lab leak hypothesis and instead pointed to a number of other possible explanations for how the virus got into the population, including some that were direct examples of Chinese propaganda. For example, that the virus entered China through frozen food packages. So they published this report, and the world was outraged because it was so ludicrous. And the interesting thing that happened was that even the WHO itself had to disown that report. And a day later, the head of the WHO, and there are many reasons to have no confidence at all in him, but even he said, contradicting the investigative team's findings, that no, nothing has been ruled out. All hypotheses need to be investigated, including the lab leak hypothesis. So something that was dismissed a long time ago as being for many, many months as a conspiracy theory is now emerging really as the mainstream consensus about how this virus entered the world. I can go into some details there, but I just want to stop for a second and see if there are any points you want to make on this aspect of the story.
Well, just why did they dismiss it as a conspiracy? Kind of steel man their argument. What was the grounds for them saying this was a conspiracy?
I think
theory?
the main reason that this part of the story, that it came from the Wuhan lab, the Wuhan Institute of Virology lab, frankly, it's all politics. Because who was making that argument last year? Who were the first people to make those suggestions? It was Republican Senator Tom Cotton. It was Republican Secretary of State Mike Pompeo. And above all, it was President Trump. And so I'm afraid this was another example of Trump derangement syndrome, where anything that Trump says, by definition, has to be wrong. And I think that's what has affected this whole story from the beginning. In fact, it looks very much as if the president was absolutely right. And Secretary Pompeo had said as much, both towards the final days of his time in office and since he left as Secretary of State. I think that the one most convincing fact about this first part of the story, did it in fact leak from the lab, is the following fact, which is that the Wuhan Institute of Virology itself has told us that the pandemic virus is a 96% match for a bat coronavirus, one that they themselves had in their lab, because that institute in Wuhan is the leading world center of research for bat coronaviruses. This pandemic virus is related to a bat coronavirus, 96% match to one that they already had. And most importantly, that origin, that sort of basic virus that is 96% the same as the pandemic virus, came from a mine shaft in a part of China that is 1,000 miles away from Wuhan. And the really interesting thing about that is that there was an incident a few years ago, I think 2012, something like that. I can't remember the exact details, but there was an outbreak of a new SARS-type illness in Mojiang. That was the name of the mine. And 3 of the miners who were infected got sick and died. And because it looked like a SARS-type respiratory illness, the Chinese authorities, having had the previous outbreak of SARS, were all over it, and they wanted to understand what happened, and they sent a team from the Wuhan Institute of Virology to go and investigate. And they collected samples from bat feces that was in the mine where these guys were working, and they took them back to their lab and stored them, and then told us now that the virus is a 96% match for one virus that they collected from that mine. So, if you are to believe the other story that people are putting out there, that the virus, the pandemic virus, was naturally occurring, that somehow it broke out in Wuhan because someone picked it up in the wet market or whatever, what you are expected to believe is that either an infected bat, when you actually look at the genetic information of the pandemic virus, this is what we are supposed to believe. It's a series of impossible coincidences.
Right.
You have to believe that a bat infected another bat and then infected some other animal that we don't know, and then traveled, or another human, and then traveled 1,000 miles across China without infecting anyone along the way, and it was heading to the one place in all of China where there already was a virus in a lab that exactly matched its own.
Yeah.
That's such it's so implausible.
Yeah. So
and that's why
the bat would have had to travel.
Actually looked at it.
The bat would have had to travel that long, or the animal, or whatever else that was infected by the bat.
Whatever it was, somehow the virus that then infected and caused the outbreak of Wuhan would have had to travel 1,000 miles.
Wow!
And miraculously, it chose the one place in all of China where there was already the same virus stored in a lab. The chance of that coincidence happening is so it's kind of inconceivable. That's why no serious person who's looked at it actually thinks that it's believable, and instead believes that the most likely explanation is that the virus leaked from that lab. Wow. Now, you asked earlier, how are we going to prove it? The problem is the Chinese authorities, the Chinese regime, in the early days of the pandemic, destroyed all the evidence and are still not cooperating.
Wow.
Why is that significant? Because the person who runs that lab, and here's another example of why we should be so skeptical of any other explanation. The person who runs, the head of the person who's, I think her title is the head of infectious diseases at the Wuhan Institute of Virology. She's a scientist called Shi Zhengli. She's on the record as saying, when the pandemic was first reported, when the outbreak was first reported in Wuhan, and the symptoms were being described, and it was in January last year, her first reaction, she said this on the record, her first reaction was, oh man, one of our viruses leaked from the lab. She said that. She's on the record as saying that.
Wow.
Now then, what did the Chinese authorities do? They clamped down. Unsurprisingly, it's a communist regime. The first thing they did was replace the head of the Wuhan Institute of Virology with the head of their bioweapons program. They put a Red Army, the head of their bioweapons program, into that facility. They deleted a database with thousands and thousands of records of the viruses they had stored there and details of what they were working on. And then, of course, as we've already discussed, they stalled for months and months and months before investigators could go in there. So it's very unlikely that we'll ever prove that it came from there because the evidence has been destroyed by the Chinese authorities.
We're speaking with Steve Hilton, host of Fox News of The Next Revolution, author of Positive Populism. We're going to take a quick break and return as we learn more from his investigation on the origins of the COVID-19 outbreak. Back in just a moment.
David Gronowski here. Let me tell you about a man named Gabriel. Every day, Gabriel puts on his boots and drives across America to make sure our store shelves stay stocked with the food people count on. See, Gabriel served our country overseas. He knows that America stands for freedom, quality, and caring for others the way we would like to be treated. That's why when Gabriel saw food shelves getting low during the pandemic, he hit the road as a driver with Oakley Transport. In the land of the free, where no one should go hungry, we need heroes like Gabriel to help keep America fed. CDLA driving professionals. Join Oakley Transport today. Keep America fed. Visit oakleytransport.com or call them today at 1-877-8-TANKER. That's 1-877-8-TANKER.
Are you ready to transform your career? Jess Smith was too. She was stuck on a job that was controlling her life, consuming her free time, and offering little opportunity for growing her pay. Then she found FinTech Mortgage Association, and she never looked back. FinTech Mortgage Association makes home lending simple, and they take care of home buyers like family. Using technology to make everyone's life easier, FinTech Mortgage Association equips each of their loan solutions architects with the tools they need to build a career with a schedule they control, a product they can take pride in, and an earning potential that is life-changing. Unleash your true potential. Join FinTech Mortgage Association. Visit finmay.com. That's FINMAE.com. You're in charge now. NMLS ID 1492187. Equal housing lender.
A lawsuit is not something that anyone looks forward to. It's a stressful process. There are attorneys in Tampa Bay that keep clients well informed, creating less stress. That law firm is Catania. Personal injury law is defended with full disclosure. There is no guessing game. If it's an auto accident, medical malpractice, nursing home negligence, unsafe working conditions, or motorcycle accidents, the law firm of Catania will handle the process worry-free from start to finish. Many victims don't realize they have a claim for the loss until they talk to Catania. They only represent private individuals and treat every case as if it's going to trial. Putting families first is more than just a slogan. It's their way of practicing law. It's a commitment to you. Remember, they don't get paid if you don't get paid. So go to Catania.com. Over 28 years in practice. Catania, personal injury, auto, and motorcycle accident attorneys. Catania, putting families first.
Office Tampa. Not attorney spokeswoman.
Welcome back to A Neighbor's Choice. I'm David Gronowski, your host, and we're joined by Steve Hilton, who's the host of The Next Revolution on Fox News and someone who's been researching the origins of the coronavirus outbreak, a very, very important, I think it's the most important story of our time right now, and it's not getting enough attention. So we wanted to have Mr. Hilton on to give us the full report as he has seen it so far in his research. So, Steve, we were talking about the step one, which is the idea that it was something that originated out of the Wuhan lab. And as you made a case, it's kind of very improbable that it came about from something outside of that lab, given the 1,000 mile distance between the bat cave, right, and the lab where the research was going on?
Exactly right. And the other point to make is that what the origin that people would say, if you have to believe the natural origin theory, they call it zoonotic, that it's a virus that is passed from animal to human. And there is no animal that anyone can point to that actually is the host. That's the other factor in most people who've really had a close look at it, concluding that it did indeed come from the lab. And there's another aspect, and this is, if you like, a bridge to the second part of the story. And this is the thing that first alerted geneticists and people who are experts in the field to something curious about this virus, this pandemic virus, that made them think, hang on a second, this does not feel like a naturally occurring virus that was passed from an animal to human. When the genetic code of the virus was first published, experts looked at it, and I've spoken to a few of these myself, but these people who looked at it, who really know how to read genetic code, they looked at it and said, this feels very different to anything we've ever seen in nature. And the specific thing about it that was different was that the virus was, in their words, optimized to be infectious. What normally happens with a virus, and a lot of us have learned a lot, probably more than we ever want to know about viruses over the past year or so, but they're living things. They want to infect people. They want to keep going. And so in order to perpetuate themselves, typically what you see during the progress of an epidemic or a pandemic is a virus becoming more infectious, adapting to the host bodies that it's in and learning how to jump more effectively from one to another, becoming more and more effective over time. This virus, from day one, was way more infectious than any previously observed virus in nature, by an order of magnitude more infectious. On a scale that geneticists use to measure these things, it's like 14 or 15 times more infectious than any virus we've ever seen in nature. And that immediately made people suspicious. How come this virus skipped all the normal cycles of getting more and more infectious, and from day one that it launched into the world was incredibly infectious, more infectious than anything we've ever seen before? And that's what made people think, you know what, this isn't naturally occurring. Let's have a look at what might have caused it to be so infectious on day one. And that brings us to the second part of the story, which is what exactly leaked from that lab in Wuhan? What was it that accidentally emerged? And this brings us to the second part, where instead of the focus being so much in the Wuhan lab, it actually comes right back home here to America. And then to explain this part of the story, we need to go back a few years again to experiments that were conducted initially with ferrets. I don't know if you spotted a story that was reported here that the first wild animal infected with the coronavirus here in America was mink. I think it was in Utah.
Huh.
And in fact, there was a big outbreak of the virus amongst the mink population in Denmark. They actually had to cull that entire population. And the reason there's an interesting connection there is that actually the family of animals, mink and ferrets, they have very similar respiratory systems to humans in a sort of anatomical level and the genetic level. And what happened was virus researchers a few years ago, they were looking into how infectious viruses could become. They were studying viruses. And what they did was take a virus, a coronavirus, and inject it into a mink. And then they were trying to, I think it was called passage experiments, where they take a virus, inject it into a ferret, and then the ferret dies, and they take the virus and they inject it into the next one, and so on. They pass it through from one animal to another using injections. They physically do it from a physical animal to the other and see what happens.
That's very interesting. We're going to hold that thought because we're going to have a little news break here at the bottom of the hour. But I do. This is so it start that the minks have a similar respiratory system as humans, and that's where this outbreak starts to occur in America. Is that right? In Utah?
No.
Oh.
We'll come back to it. Do we need to take a break now?
Yeah. We'll take a quick break and return.
We'll pick it up the other side.
Yeah, we're speaking with Steve Hilton, host of The Next Revolution on Fox News, as we continue his research into the origins of the coronavirus outbreak. Back in a moment.
There is all kinds of lunacy going on. The madness of 2020.
Weekdays 11 to 2.
I'm just so fed up with these Democrats. It's unbelievable.
Get it straight from Chris Plant.
They're so hypocritical. It makes me sick.
It's the Chris Plant Show.
This has just got me going on.
And the left is waging war against the police in the United States.
Telling it like it is.
You should be thanked profusely for getting to the point.
You're a voice of reason in the sea of idiots.
The Chris Plant Show. Weekdays 11 to 2. News Talk 1040 WHBO.
Adding stars to shoulders on International Women's Day, President Biden announcing nominations for 2 female generals.
When confirmed, they will become the second and third women in the history of the United States Armed Forces to lead combatant commands.
The president nominating Air Force General Jacqueline Van Ovost and Army Lieutenant General Laura Richardson to 4-star positions. The U.S. tomorrow is scheduled to allow more than 300,000 Venezuelans currently in the country to apply for temporary protected status, or TPS, a designation that lets them stay, say senior Biden administration officials. New CDC guidelines: vaccinated folks can gather with vaccinated grandparents or friends without masks.
When fully vaccinated people are visiting with unvaccinated people from multiple households, everyone should wear masks and physically distance and meet outdoors in a well-ventilated space.
CDC Director Dr. Rochelle Walensky. On Wall Street, the S&P and NASDAQ lost, the Dow gained. Chuck Sievertson, ABC News.
The coronavirus continues to be the biggest story in the whole world. It's changed lives for millions of people. It's affected people of all sorts of backgrounds. It has rocked world economies, changed cultural rituals and behaviors that have been going on for decades, suddenly totally upended by this moment. And yet, for some reason, the media doesn't want to give a deep dive, by and large, to the origins of the coronavirus outbreak and to really methodically look at the facts as best can be ascertained. Well, to do that, we have Fox News host Steve Hilton of The Next Revolution on with us, who has been going through step by step the research that his team and him have been doing into the origins of the coronavirus outbreak. So, Steve, let's pick up where we left off here. You were talking about the minks and how that connects to this.
Well, the ferrets and minks. So there's virus researchers wanted to understand how viruses become more contagious. And the reason they want to do that is to help us understand how to fight viruses. So it's got a noble intent behind it. And one of the experiments that were conducted a decade or so ago were among ferrets, where they took a virus, injected it into ferrets, observed what happened, and then took the same and passed the virus from one ferret to another physically using injections to see how much more contagious the virus became. That's what viruses do. They learn to adapt and become more contagious. And what they found was actually during the course of these passage experiments from one ferret physically to another, the virus actually became airborne. That was the big thing they observed. By the final stages of the experiment, they didn't need to inject the virus physically from one ferret to another. It literally passed through the air from one ferret to another. And this was a really interesting breakthrough. And what they then did, what scientists then did with that, was what they did physically with the ferrets. They invented a whole new branch of virus research, which was done in the lab, no longer using ferrets, but using gene technology, laboratory-based research. But to do the same thing, to take a virus and make it more contagious, to observe how much more contagious it could become, so that you would learn how to fight the virus better. That was the idea. It was about finding out what vaccines might work or treatments. So as I said, it had a positive and noble intent. This new field of virus research was called gain-of-function virus research, because literally the virus, in the course of the research, it gains new functions. In the case of the ferrets, it became airborne. That was a new function that it gained. And so gain-of-function virus research was a whole new field enabled by progress in genomics, and it promised a great future. It suggested to scientists that we could learn very quickly without actually waiting for a real pandemic. We could actually learn about what could be out there and how much worse it could get, and so we could prepare our defenses in advance. That was the theory. And one of the biggest exponents, one of the biggest champions of this theory at the time was one of the world's leading professionals in the field of fighting infectious diseases, none other than Dr. Anthony Fauci. And in 2011, you can look this up, anyone who's listening, he wrote an article, an editorial in the Washington Post, along with Dr. Francis Collins, his boss. Dr. Francis Collins now runs the National Institutes of Health. Dr. Fauci runs one of those institutes, the National Institute of Allergy and Infectious Diseases. And together they jointly wrote an opinion piece in 2011 arguing for this kind of research. And the reason they wanted to take out that editorial and argue for it was because actually, even at the time, this type of research, gain of function virus research, was highly controversial. You had a lot of scientists who were very much in favor of it, like Dr. Fauci, who said, look, this can teach us really valuable stuff that will enable us to fight future pandemics. But you had many other scientists who said, hang on a second, this is really dangerous. If you are making viruses more contagious in the lab, what happens if they somehow escape? There are lab leaks, not all the time, but they do happen. You can't be 100% certain about any lab security or biosafety. And so you're running a huge risk here of releasing into the world something that you've genetically engineered in a lab. You might bring about the very thing that you're trying to learn how to prevent. And so it's always been controversial. They wrote this opinion piece in 2011 in the Washington Post. A key phrase in that article from Dr. Fauci was that gain of function virus research is a risk worth taking. Those are his words. It's a risk worth taking. He recognized the risks, but they argued that it was a risk worth taking. And so he was running the NIAID, and he started putting money into this kind of research, our money, taxpayer money, government money, funding this kind of research in many labs all around the world. But the debate around this type of research continued. And in fact, a group of scientists set up something called the Cambridge Working Group. Again, this is something people can look up right now. Some of the top scientists in the world, including many that Americans will recognize from their TV screens, people who've been on TV throughout the pandemic, like Tom Inglesby, who's been on Fox News very frequently during the pandemic, or Michael Osterholm, who's NBC News' pandemic expert, and a bunch of other people. They came together to warn about the risks of gain of function research, and they said, we shouldn't continue with this research until we've done proper investigation of the costs and benefits and the potential risks, and also investigate other less dangerous ways of trying to find out the same information about making viruses more contagious. So this was a heated debate going on in the scientific community. The next key date is 2014, under the Obama administration, when the administration itself, through the White House, in listening to this scientific debate, and on the back of a few biosafety incidents that had happened that year, where hazardous biomaterial had leaked from U.S. research labs, government-owned research labs, in 2014, the Obama administration put a moratorium on gain of function virus research. It said, you shouldn't do any new projects. We will not fund any new projects, and any existing projects that are going on, we think should be stopped while we look into the potential risks, etc. That was 2014. At the same time, just before that ban was put in place, the National Institutes of Health, under Dr. Fauci, you can look this up, it's all online, they awarded a research grant to investigate bat coronaviruses. The award was made, the research grant was made to an organization called Eco Health Alliance based in New York. Eco Health Alliance was run by someone called Peter Daszak, who came to fame because he was originally a sort of naturalist who studied nature, and he worked and actually had a very strong claim to fame in that he helped establish the cause of the original SARS epidemic and traced it back to the bats in China that we now know were the source of the original SARS epidemic back in a few years before the time we're talking about. So Peter Daszak was well known as an expert in bat coronaviruses, and his organization, Eco Health Alliance, in fact, was doing a lot of work in this area, specifically working to go and track down different bats and get biological samples and really establish our knowledge of these coronaviruses. So Dr. Fauci's NIH awards Eco Health Alliance a grant to research bat coronaviruses. He then, Peter Daszak, subcontracts part of that work to the Wuhan Institute of Virology. Because the bat coronaviruses and the SARS epidemic originally, a lot of this originated in China, that Wuhan Institute had developed a real expertise in bat coronaviruses, so it was natural for him to work with them on this project. But the money, the funding came from us, from the US government. And this is the part of the story that is now the kind of focus of our investigation. Because when you actually look at the genetic makeup of the pandemic virus, SARS-CoV-2, remember I said earlier, it's a 96% match for the virus that was found in a mine 1,000 miles from Wuhan that caused a respiratory SARS-like illness that killed 3 people. What's the difference between that bat coronavirus, that's a 96% match for the one we have now, the pandemic virus? There's one big difference.
What is
that
it?
original virus that killed those 3 men in the mine was not airborne. It was not transmissible human to human. The people that got infected in the mine did not pass on the virus to their families who they lived with, to the medical workers who looked after them, to the communities where they circulated. Only the people who actually had direct contact with the bat feces in the mine actually got infected. The virus was not airborne. The virus that's a 96% match for the pandemic virus. That 4% difference between the genetic code of that bat virus and the pandemic virus, that's exactly where, if you were doing gain-of-function virus research to enhance the transmissibility of the virus, to see how contagious you could make it, that's the 2 main changes in the genetic code. That's exactly where that 4% difference is. So everything points to the idea that the work that was commissioned by Dr. Fauci to understand how we could make bat coronaviruses more contagious so we could learn to fight them, that is indeed the origin of the pandemic virus, which somehow leaked accidentally from the Wuhan lab.
Now, Peter Daszak, wasn't he also the one that was commissioned by the WHO to investigate the origins of the virus?
Exactly. That's why, and there's more to him. I mean, there's so many other, I've just tried to give you the basic structure of the story, but there's lots of other details that are very compelling here. One, exactly as you've mentioned, that should immediately arouse suspicion, is that Peter Daszak, who actually worked with Xi Zhengli physically to get the bat coronaviruses, and he gave her he subcontracted the work. This is all recorded. There's a paper trail of all of this. There's even a progress report that they published in 2017, and the names of Peter Daszak and Xi Zhengli, the head of the Wuhan Institute of Virology, Infectious Diseases Unit. Their names are on this paper. It describes the work that they did for the Fauci grant and its gain-of-function virus research. This is disputed, I should say, by the NIH in our dealings with them, but verified by other scientists. Peter Daszak, as you say, was unbelievably appointed by the WHO to their investigation. And not only he was appointed to it, he's the only U.S. representative on the WHO investigation. The conflict of interest there is astonishing. That's why one of the main things that critics of the investigation have called for is for him to be removed and replaced by someone who's more objective. The other thing that's important to, the other sort of pieces of the puzzle that are interesting here, there were a couple of things. In 2018, our own State Department published cables reporting serious concerns about the biosafety of the Wuhan Institute. Right. Then we also have, Mike Pompeo has referred to this, intelligence reported, he released this in January. He reported on it in January. The raw intelligence hasn't been released. The first people in Wuhan to actually exhibit COVID-like symptoms arising from what we now know to be the coronavirus were workers at the Wuhan Institute. Right. Back in October, in the fall, I think they're saying, the fall of 2019. There's so much that points in this direction. As I said, we can't prove it for sure. There's another thing, actually, I would add, which is that I've been putting this story together by talking to experts and people who are familiar with the genetic, scientific aspects of this. And they're, for various reasons, wanting to remain anonymous, either because they're worried it might affect their careers or their other working relationships. And there's a lot of establishment weight behind the grants that come from Dr. Fauci, the research partnerships in China, and so on. So very few people are willing to speak out. It's very interesting. But we did speak to probably the leading person on the Cambridge Working Group that I mentioned. This was the group of scientists that got together to warn about the risks of gain-of-function virus research. And one of the leading figures on there is a guy called Dr. Richard Ebright at Rutgers University. He's one of the original signatories, and we spoke to him, and we put all our evidence and information to him, and he pointed us to, again, something that's available for anyone to inspect. It's online, the renewal of that original NIH grant, research grant. Remember, the original grant was made in 2014. He pointed us to the renewal in 2019, which also, in his view, and he's been public about this, he gave us a statement that we've used on the show publicly, he specifically says that the work described in that 2019 renewal is gain-of-function virus research. It should have been flagged for review under the protocols that were established, and it wasn't. And so it's astonishing to me that there's not more desire to get to the bottom of this, because it looks very much like the origin of this pandemic can be laid at the door of the two most powerful governments in the world. The Chinese government, obviously, they allowed the virus to leak, and then worse still, they engaged in the immediate cover-up. But then our own government that potentially funded the research that led to this in the first place, as we've said week after week on the show, pleading with either Dr. Fauci or Dr. Collins or anyone from the NIH to come on and respond to our stories. We said, look, if we're wrong, come and tell us why.
Right.
We just want to get to the truth, not because we want to blame anyone or point fingers, but to answer these simple questions like, are we still funding this research?
Right.
If it caused the last pandemic, then surely we should stop, and so on. So it's really not about blaming anyone. It is about learning what happened so we can avoid it happening again.
We're speaking with Steve Hilton. He's the host of The Next Revolution on Fox News Channel. We're going to take a quick break and in return for final comments and thoughts on what he has found in his investigation of the coronavirus outbreak. It's fascinating stuff. We want to give him as much time possible to get it all the facts out as he can, because this is the biggest story in the world, literally. Back in a moment, live on A Neighbor's Choice.
Hello, this is David Gronowski with A Neighbor's Choice. I've got a mission for you. I'm a big believer in eating family farm-raised, high-quality grass-fed beef. That's why I'm a frequent customer of White Oak Pasture, a 6th-generation beautiful farm in southwest Georgia. Support sustainable, delicious meat of the highest quality. Ask for White Oak Pasture's beef at your local grocery here in Florida, or go to whiteoakpastures.com, and first-time customers get 20% off on purchases with our exclusive coupon code NEIGHBOR. Who is your neighbor? Dave and Wally are team drivers for Oakley Transport. One day, they came across a very serious accident on the highway. Some might pass on by, but Dave and Wally saw there was no time to waste. They jumped into action and saved 2 people's lives with moments to spare. That's the kind of courageous love we need more of today. It reflects the respected culture Oakley Transport develops with their driving professionals. CDLA licensed drivers. Join Oakley Transport today for a rewarding career. Visit oakleytransport.com. That's oakleytransport.com.
A lawsuit is not something that anyone looks forward to. It's a stressful process. There are attorneys in Tampa Bay that keep clients well informed, creating less stress. That law firm is Catania. Personal injury law is defended with full disclosure. There is no guessing game. If it's an auto accident, medical malpractice, nursing home negligence, unsafe working conditions, or motorcycle accidents, the law firm of Catania will handle the process worry-free from start to finish. Many victims don't realize they have a claim for the loss until they talk to Catania. They only represent private individuals and treat every case as if it's going to trial. Putting families first is more than just a slogan. It's their way of practicing law. It's a commitment to you. Remember, they don't get paid if you don't get paid. So go to Catania.com. Over 28 years in practice. Catania, personal injury, auto, and motorcycle accident attorneys. Catania, putting families first.
Office Tampa. Not attorney spokeswoman.
Welcome back to A Neighbor's Choice. I'm your host, David Gronowski, here live with our guest for this hour. Steve Hilton is the host of The Next Revolution on Fox News Channel, and he's going through step-by-step his investigation into the coronavirus outbreak. And the guy at the center of a lot of this, of course, is what you've detailed is this Eco Health Alliance, Peter Daszak, right? And was it not the case that he came out and said, or maybe it was a leaked email, that he had downplayed the idea of it being connected to the lab because he wanted to protect the scientists who he really didn't have any basis for saying there was no evidence?
You're quite right, which is again something that we should really alert us and make us suspicious, because he not only came out himself, he organized a letter of scientists really quickly. I think it was February last year, and persuaded the Lancet to publish it, which was categorically denying the lab leak hypothesis. In February last year, we barely knew anything about the virus at that point. There was absolutely no possibility that any kind of investigation could have happened. And yet there he was, supposedly a scientist, getting other scientists to sign a letter saying it can't have been this. It was completely outrageous. Another reason why he must be removed from the WHO investigation.
And then he said, but there's some emails I saw, and I wish I need to find the link to it again, but remember...
Oh, yes, exactly. He wanted to hide the track. You're right. This has all been published. Yeah. He wanted to deny that he had any role in organizing the response. He wanted to make it look as if it was a authentic response, and scientists just happened to sort of clear the lab of any suspicion without him actually having been the one who instigated this response.
And he also
it's so suspicious.
And I remember, and again, there was another email or something where he said, basically, I didn't have any basis for saying it. I just didn't want to see those good scientists run through the mud. They were being destroyed, and I had to say something to get people off their backs. That's what I remember saying.
Yeah, that's right. I mean, it's completely inexcusable. Right. Look, you can understand why he may want to defend himself and those he worked with. That's of course his right. But the idea that we should accept him in an investigatory role, which is supposed to be neutral and just seeking the truth and the facts, is ludicrous.
So Dr. Fauci is the highest paid federal employee, according to openthebooks.com, and higher paid than the president. And yet you've made a case here in this last hour that he funded what happened, which ended up becoming a leak with this coronavirus on accident, breaking out of the Wuhan lab and destroying. How come? What recourse do we have? You know, is there anybody?
Well, this is the interesting question, because one thing that is fascinating to me is why the rest of the media are not interested in pursuing this. You see Fauci on the media all the time. He's never asked about this. You don't see the administration asked about it. And as I say, time and time again, look, if we're wrong, explain why we're wrong. We've laid out what we think are the steps that point to this conclusion. We've never said with 100% confidence, this is the answer. We can't possibly know. We keep, the way we always put it is, to us, it seems like this is the most likely explanation. But even if there's a slight chance that this pandemic originated because of work commissioned by and paid for by the U.S. government, don't you think we should have a thorough investigation? It's astonishing to me that this isn't happening. I mean, we are not going to give up the pressure. An answer to your question in terms of how we get finally some accountability here, and regardless of whether it was actually whether we can ever prove that this was the origin, we should have a proper open discussion about gain of function virus research. We need to know if it's still being funded. We need to know what Dr. Fauci still thinks about it. In 2011, remember, he wrote that op-ed saying he thought it was a risk worth taking. Is it still a risk worth taking? Is it a risk that we still are taking? Is this research going on? All these are absolutely vital public policy questions that we need to debate, but they're not being debated because it's all wrapped up in the politics of whether you are pro or anti-Fauci. And that is just not good enough, given how seriously this whole thing has affected the world.
Yeah, and it's something where it seems like media outlets, they want to act like PR firms for their clicks, whatever click that they find to be, politically popular or whatever. And that's just a shame, utter shame. Well, where do you go next in your investigation? We're almost out of time, but I want to give people, what's going to happen next?
We're going to keep going. We're going to keep building the case. We're going to keep digging for more information. And one thing I want to make sure we do is move it into the political arena in the sense of our political institutions that are supposed to get to the truth for us. So in Congress, there will be a time when I don't think Democrats are interested in pursuing this because, as you just said, they're all 100% lined up behind Dr. Fauci. You don't want to hear a word against him. And by the way, no one has said that he or anyone else did anything deliberately here. It's all with good intentions, as we've pointed out, but it's an accident. So I think we'll need to push this forward, and I think there may be a time when Republicans have the investigatory power once again in Congress, and I hope that at that point we can have a proper investigation.
Yeah, and we need to ask a simple question. Why is the highest paid federal employee, potentially behind incompetent financing of gain of function research, which has ended up costing hundreds of thousands of people's lives and wrecked the world economy? Good gravy. We should be able to ask this question if we're going to have any semblance of a free society left,
Of course.
Well, very good. Steve Hilton, you've done a great job summarizing the facts of this case with dates and so forth, and we're going to continue to follow your work with interest. So I really appreciate you coming on the program.
No, it's been a pleasure. Thank you very much.
Very good. And be sure to check out The Next Revolution with Steve Hilton on Fox News Channel. Very good stuff. I don't see anybody else covering this story, and this is the biggest story for journalism to be dealing with. So let's hope other people get behind this research so we can find out the truth, because the truth will set you free. That's what it's all about. So I'm glad we had this time. You can email me hello@aneighborschoice.com for a guest suggestion or a comment. hello@aneighborschoice.com. I'm David Gronowski. Godspeed.